Hello, my name is Annie Chang, and I work for the Walt Disney Studios, and I'm also the chair of the IMF Working Group at SMPTE. For this riveting presentation, I will give a short introduction to what IMF is. First off, you must be wondering what IMF stands for. International Monetary Fund? Too scandalous! Impossible Mission Force? Ugh, I hope not. It stands for the Interoperable Master Format, which is a framework for file-based assets like image, audio, and subtitles. The flexible framework allows you to mix and match the assets so that you can create different versions, but only store the differences between the versions. In order to save more space, you can also use mezzanine level compression for the assets. I bet you're thinking, great, another file format? Well, the difference here is that this file format is getting standardized through the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers, an internationally recognized standards body. We didn't want to just reinvent the wheel. Instead, we plan to reuse existing standards where possible and ensure interoperability through constrained standards. So we're trying not to throw everything plus the kitchen sink into it. IMF is meant to be used for business to business and not meant to go to the consumer directly. It is a high-quality final master that would contain all final assets such as image, audio, subtitling, captioning, technical metadata, and playlists for content. The original intent of IMF was to be a grand master that contained all of the different cuts and versions of that content, including all language versions, but it is starting to evolve at SMPTE. There are discussions about using the flexible versioning capability, but with even higher compressed file types. IMF is meant for final, edited versions of content, so it's not meant to be an origination format or for live-to-air production. Therefore, it's not meant to be used for camera outputs, dailies, or editorial. This doesn't mean that it can't be used for these, but it wasn't originally developed for these applications. Originally, IMF was not meant to be a final delivery package to a distribution, but at SMPTE, there are possible use cases for this, so the discussions are ongoing. However, you can always transcode to other files from IMF. IMF was also not meant for archive. Archival elements have other requirements such as error correction, how data is written, etc. Once again, IMF could be used for archive if a content owner wishes. But keep in mind that IMF was trying to solve a different problem, just having a standardized interchangeable file format. It wasn't meant to solve all the issues surrounding digital preservation. IMF standards will be published to the public later in 2012, and many manufacturers already have plans to support it and are working on implementations now. You might be wondering how this could be, since there are so many discussions at SMPTE surrounding what IMF can do. IMF has a core framework that includes the playlists and asset wrapping, as well as the general image, audio, and subtitling parameters. But IMF gets its flexibility and future-proofing from these modular applications that plug into the framework. Each of these applications allow for a specific functionality, like certain codecs and resolutions, and allows for different problems to be solved. The idea would be that any manufacturer that supports a particular application would be interoperable within that application, but not necessarily between applications. So enough with the boring text. Let's have some pictures. So, you might be wondering, where does IMF fit in the greater picture for workflow? Let's take a typical use case for a show that uses the Digital Intermediate, or DI, workflow. You shoot the show and view the dailies and start doing editorial on the show. The EDL, or Edit Decision List, as well as the original camera footage goes into the DI process. Meanwhile, you'll record your dialogue and mix the audio and localize into various languages. If it's a motion picture feature, you might have several different color-timed outputs, a film out, a digital cinema package, and a bunch of file formats and tapes for the HD Rec. 709 masters. And you'll create the various versions for the different languages. The Rec. 709 is the one that propagates into a bunch of distributions. You'll create masters for Blu-ray, standard definition for DVD and broadcast, and other distribution channels, such as electronic sell-through and VOD. Note that there is no standard file format, and many of these masters have to be full, long-play versions of the feature. IMF can replace the HD Grandmaster and the SD Grandmaster, allowing other mezzanine file formats and deliverables to be created from it. Then, hopefully one day, perhaps some distributions will be able to take IMF directly, removing the need to create all of the various file formats that we need to create today. Note that some file formats will still have to be created after IMF is made. Oh, and just in case you're wondering about how IMF fits with ACES IIF, the Academy Color Encoding Specification Image Interchange Framework would be upstream from IMF in the DI stage, while IMF would be one of the outputs from the ACES IIF process. So, how do you get more involved with IMF? Visit the imfforum.com site often. There will be some exciting developments happening this whole year in 2012. And I encourage you to join the SMPTE standards effort by joining the 35 PM Technology Committee and the 35 PM 50 Working Group for IMF. The IMF 102 presentation will cover more details on the actual components of IMF, but hopefully now you have a better understanding of what IMF is all about. IMF, doing for video masters what DCPs did for cinema. Thanks for listening.